Greetings, innovators and leaders. This is AI for the C-Suite, your compass for navigating the exponential age. I'm Chad Harvey, and we're here to bring you cutting-edge insights on AI tailored specifically for middle-market organizations. Buckle up as we embark on a journey through the transformative world of artificial intelligence. My guest today is Rebecca Sykes, a partner at the Brandtech Group, where she leads their emergent technology practice. Rebecca has been at the forefront of implementing generative AI across the creative process for major global brands, including Unilever, Diageo, and L'Oreal. Her work spans from developing enterprise-level legal frameworks for AI governance to creating practical solutions for bias mitigation and brand safety. That is a mouthful. Before her current role, Rebecca served as CEO of MoFilm, where she helped global brands create locally relevant video content at scale. She brings a unique perspective on how technology can enhance creative work while maintaining brand authenticity and ethical standards. Rebecca has spoken about AI implementation at various prestigious venues, including MIT, where I had the great privilege of seeing her at the end of 24, Adweek, and the World Federation of Advertisers. She holds an executive education certificate in strategy from Harvard Business School and has been certified in the ethics of AI. Rebecca, welcome to AI for the C-Suite.
Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited for our conversation today, and I've been looking forward to this discussion since I saw you at MTech in October of 24, and you were one of the first people that was speaking to a concern that I've had that no one else has been addressing in terms of brand sentiment and the consolidation of the internet into these AI systems. So before we start unpacking some of that, let me start us off and ask here, you've overseen generative AI implementation for multiple clients at the Brandtech Group. Why don't you walk us through what that journey looks like and what were some of the early challenges you encountered? Because you are clearly on the bleeding edge here.
Yeah, thank you. It is definitely a journey. And I would say we foresee that this year, 2025, is kind of the year of the scale up. We've seen a lot of piloting happening over the last couple of years, a lot of brands dipping their toe. We focus predominantly with enterprise level brands. And of course, they come with their own set of challenges, expectations, standards, and kind of rules they must adhere to when they're adopting new technology in this way. So there's a lot of change. There's a lot to understand, and I think this shift from change management being this finite thing that you do at a time to implement a new way of working, to almost this notion of kind of brands in perpetual motion, and the way that you do things, the way you go to market, the way you kind of tell your brand stories and who you are, the way that your teams collaborate and work together, that this is going to constantly change and evolve. You won't almost be able to keep up with the training, to match the pace of how things develop and move forward. This is a really different way of working for brands. It's a very fluid kind of space, and it's hard. It's really hard to imagine how you turn a huge organization with structured processes into an organization that can leverage and recognize the value of that kind of change and pace of evolution, in anything like a kind of real time understanding, but from when the technology shifts to when the business starts to see the impact of that technology. So it's a real shift, it's a real change in the way that brands work, and I think there are certain things that kind of brands stumble upon as they go through this process. The first is just the fear of that it's huge and it's difficult to change. It's bringing together different parts of the organization in ways that maybe they haven't previously had to be kind of figuratively or really in one room. You put tech and IT and legal and marketing and procurement and the entire organization has to negotiate this one move, this one shift. So some of those things I think are difficult. I think there's challenge around public perception, especially from a creative point of view, but also internally, there's fear and friction there sometimes. So there's things to overcome. But when we are working with brands now who are really getting there and they're moving out of the pilot phase and they're into a scale-up phase, the results are honestly unbelievable. And I think that's what I think we're going to see come out this year. It's going to make that change a little easier for the next wave of brands that go through that kind of transformation. Because I'll give you an example. We spent last year, we made almost 250,000, 235,000 pieces of content across 3 of the world's top 10 global brands. So, big, well-known, well-understood brands. And on average, across that 250,000 pieces of content, the work we delivered with AI was 62% faster, 55% cheaper, 40% gain in performance or effectiveness. So when you start to see scaled numbers come out of the industry and other brands look at that, I think there's no way to look at those numbers and to look at that understanding of how big the transformation can be and not want to go on that journey yourself, not want to start putting your organization and making it kind of match ready for a world that looks like that.
Your observation about 2025 being the year that we really start to see a lot of the benefits of the investment really squares with a lot of what I've seen out there and a lot of even the publicly available figures in terms of the substantial amount of investment that middle market as well as globally traded companies have been making in 2024. So I'm interested, when you start working with a company, and clearly you've had a couple that have been on this journey with you here, right? What does the time frame typically look like for getting in there? Do they come to you predisposed with an idea of what they want? Are they already receptive to the changes that are happening here? Or do you have to spend some time up front working with them initially to get them bought in to where we're going as, quite frankly, a society?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's always a pocket within the organization that's fully signed up, like AI card carriers. There has to be, otherwise you just don't have the will for to kind of this and look at that. In some cases, it's been all in across the whole business. We're participating in full Gen AI RFPs. We have already decided as an organization we are going to put in sort of transformational horizontal application of Gen AI across our business, and now we're looking for the right people to partner with us on that. That obviously is faster, more efficient, makes the most sense across the business that they've already realized based on the kind of numbers I'm talking about, or their understanding of where the industry is and how far the technology has to go and the impact of that. They've made a decision already. In other cases, we see that is being driven from marketing or driven from procurement or driven from one part of an enterprise business. And then sometimes that's a little harder because you maybe have a department who's not ready for change or has a system that it doesn't work too badly for them right now, or they just are unsure of the process for change. So then sometimes there's a little bit more of that kind of a demonstration that needs to happen, and there's still a big role for kind of piloting. I know it's got a bit of a dirty word now. I think like people, it feels like it's not enough. It's small, but pilots don't have to be small, and they don't have to be inconsequential. We try a pilot in a way where you, at the end of a time-bound pilot, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, you have enough data, enough knowledge. You've applied it in a meaningful enough way that you have a full business case for what this would look like at scale across your business. That's a useful step, I think, in the process of talking about kind of business-wide change. So sometimes it's a case of running those processes to bring everybody into alignment. And certainly when you have that, you can go fast.
When you talk about piloting some of these different projects and then determining whether they're ready to scale, one of the things that I'm always interested in is what types of metrics or indicators are you able to bring to bear to determine whether that pilot can scale? And furthermore, how many of those are new indicators or new metrics that you've had to use as opposed to older ones that still fit the bill or maybe were able to be repurposed?
Yeah, good question. We normally focus on 5 different metrics, the things people care about. I would say all of them are old metrics in terms of they were things you measured before, but maybe they weren't prioritized because it was hard to improve upon them. So things like speed, scale, we see kind of more than a 10x speed up in certain parts of the process, sometimes much more than that. In other places, there's still a very human element. You might see slightly less, but on aggregate, we're looking at speed up across a process of delivery. We see scale up. So projects now that have kind of 40,000 plus deliverables, it's just not unusual. If you're talking about less than 10,000 deliverables, you're not talking about a scaled project in our world right now. And that's not the case for lots of marketers, but it could be when we really think about the the promise now of personalization, or at least cohort specific, and then performance related optimization, you might be looking at really assets in the thousands, tens of thousands. We look at quality. Obviously, it's no good having a huge volume of work if you are not assured of hitting a kind of minimum threshold of quality, which will relate to all kinds of brand specific attributes that, that brand measures quality by. And obviously, if we're making thousands or tens of thousands of assets, you can't assess them all manually to see that they hit that quality. So you need systems in place to then ensure that you hit quality thresholds. Of course, we also want to see performance gains. We want more content, not just to fill up the internet with content, but because that increase in variance and the opportunity to test drives performance gains. So we want to see greater ROI. We want to see improved ROAS, or whatever our core metric is. And then, of course, you need to see a cost reduction. So across those 5 elements, they tend to be the core 5 metrics that we assess any kind of activity against, and then look at kind of business case across those 5 things.
Let me drill in a little bit on something you touched on, which is near and dear to my heart, which is the amount and the volume of content that we're about to see unleashed by generative AI. We've seen the beginning of this, but I don't think we've really seen the full impact yet. And one of the things that I'm very interested in is, how does a brand stand out? How do they make their voice heard when everyone has access to generative AI tools, right? Some folks are going to use them more effectively than others, and there's an awful lot of brands out there that don't really understand their voice. They're just about ready to hit that button, and instead of generating 10 blog posts, now we're going to have 100, or we're going to have a bunch of automatically generated video content. So how do brands make sure that they're cutting through all the coming chatter, if you will?
Yeah, it's also very close to my heart. Thinking about, is this a race to the bottom of quality
Right.
and fundamentally, we're talking about working with a probability-based tool system, a system designed to give you the next most probable right answer, and getting it to give you something that is divergent, right, not convergent. That divergence is oxygen for brands, convergence is death, essentially. So, if we're all using the same tools in the same way and we're not differentiating them in any way, you are going to land in a kind of sea of sameness, this middle ground that doesn't differentiate you. And at that point, if you make 10 blog posts to your example, or 100, it's irrelevant, because you're not unique in any way.
Right.
I think there are 2 ways in which we drive that uniqueness. The first is the inclusion of your own first-party data, the kind of codification of your brand and your values. And that's a real challenge for some marketers. Some are very open and honest to say, we don't know who we are well enough to make our brand machine readable. So if you asked people across our business the same question about what we stand for, or who we appeal to, you'd get, if you asked 5 people, you'd get 5 answers. So in those cases, that's a real challenge for those brands. And there's a process of really honing the craft of building a brand that is incredibly important, that almost needs to come first, or at the very least run in parallel. So working out how you leverage technology to maximize the impact of that brand. So I think that's one area, is like bringing in your own first party data, having absolute clarity on who you are. And that can be everything from kind of, as I say, what you stand for, what you mean to people, the emotion you evoke, as well as the basics of like what colors and sounds and imagery is connected to you, what style. How do people know at the first instant that they see something that it's you, that it's your brand, and it could only be your brand? And I think having that as a goal is incredibly important. And the second is then making sure that the people who work with AI on your behalf are incredibly skillful when they do that, because we see prompting being less critical when we think about a world where we have GPTs and agents and things that support us, and everything doesn't start from scratch in a single prompt. But even still, the understanding of AI and how to use it to, I say a lot, to get AI to zig when everybody else is zagging. You're trying to get AI to give you the unprobable thing. You have to be a subject matter expert in the thing you're prompting about to know what that looks like, to know what the rules are in order to break them. You really do need skilled users. And so I think that's another incredibly important part. Make sure your brand is very distinct, make sure your people are very distinct, and that their skill set it's one you're really investing in with them. I think if you can do both of those things, you stand a much greater chance of using AI to create white space around your brand and to move into spaces that are more likely to develop, to have high impact for you, than into a space where you get closer to other brands, less differentiated and kind of more likely to have, more landfill content.
Right. I'm loving this conversation. Every answer that you provide, there are at least 40 things that we could probably spend an hour talking about. One of the things that you just mentioned, though, really prompted a question with me. And that is let me just kind of lay this out. What we've seen, even before the rise of generative AI, is a drive towards what I'm going to call micro-targeting. And that's probably not the brand appropriate word, but making brand communications very personalized, right, to individuals. And it seems to me that we have an opportunity here to go even further down that rabbit hole. And so how does a brand balance personalization and outreach to its clients, its customers, its consumers against its brand identity? Because it would seem to me that sometimes those two things could be in conflict.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think that, again, if you don't have that solid understanding of who you are, then personalization could take you down many kind of identity loops where you show up in a different way to different parts of your audience, which obviously isn't the goal behind personalization. The goal is to make sure that who you are and what you do and what you provide is communicated in the most resonant way to that particular cohort. I think personalization is a little bit like kind of the advent of the mobile age or the digital age, or lots of much touted kind of new evolutions of marketing, where it was supposed to be the year of for many years until it eventually was suddenly the year of.
Right.
And I think personalization is one of those things that we understood, we knew why it would be valuable, but it's actually incredibly hard to do still. And you're right. I think Gen AI does open up a possibility and an opportunity for infinite play and variability and testing of like what's working for different audiences, and also the ability to bring together data sets that you previously couldn't align, like fuzzy data, the data that wasn't concrete, that we could then work with to bring nuance and color to things that weren't binary. So I think we've got lots of opportunity in that space, and that there's part of the challenge then is making sure that we can create incredibly specific comms. Do we have addressable audiences for that sort of content to reach those people in the right way? And what role does kind of media targeting play versus creative targeting? So there's lots of things to balance here, and it's not an exact science at this point, but I think the opportunity is definitely open now, and there is possibility to play much more in that space.
Yeah. Your phrase, this is not an exact science right now, I think that could be a universal statement for where we all are on this journey.
Yeah. I agree.
Let's shift gears slightly. I know that in 2023, your company, the Brandtech Group, acquired Pencil, a generative AI creative platform. There are not a lot of organizations out there that have taken the dip into generative AI in such a major way, let alone purchased an entire tool set like that. So talk a little bit about that journey. What brought Brandtech Group to the point where they said, okay, this makes sense for us to acquire this creative platform? And also, what should companies look for when they're evaluating AI tools and platforms for enterprise or middle market level deployment, either for buying, renting, building, whatever? I know that's a broad question.
Yeah, two meaty questions there. Okay, let me talk you through the journey. So actually, the Brandtech Group, at the point of our founding back in 2015, one of our founding pillars was machine-generated content, which sounded kind of nuts at that time. But, we had a sense, and our founder, David Jones, had a real sense that was a piece of the future for sure. And we made lots of investments over the early years. And we actually met Will and Smook, the founders, CEO and CTO of Pencil, very early when they founded Pencil, which was back in 2018. They founded it at a point where there were only research papers on this technology. And they began building the very first versions of kind of ChatGPT. And at a point where you could only generate text, at a point where you had to generate 2,000 headlines to find 4 that made sense. It really was very, very nascent at that point. So I think We always knew as a group that this was going to be a piece of the future that we believed kind of brand tech was built to service. This notion of brands being built and marketing being done better, faster, and cheaper by the implementation of technology, judicious use of technology. So we knew that, and we had Pencil kind of on our radar. As they evolved, the business and the technology iterated so quickly so that they could build a system. It then became very clear that this was a really unique business in the industry, obviously just partly because of the number of years and experience they had in very specifically making marketing communications using the tech. So it wasn't an all-purpose platform designed to make anything you wanted. It was absolutely designed to generate ads. Okay. And I think that is also a very unique lens to look at generative technology, and then of course all of the learnings that they've had over that time, and the later iterations of the technology that Pencil has been built on and now incorporates. Pencil now aggregates many language models, many image generation models, many video models. So it really is a kind of horizontal deployment architecture. You can kind of access OpenAI and Google's models. You can access Adobe Firefly. You can access many of the models and the best models in the market through a single interface. And I think that evolution has come from being there at the very beginning, seeing what was being released and being able to bring in the best of what the market was offering and the industry had developed into a single place that was a platform designed just to give you better advertising. Yeah. So I think the fit with us as a Brandtech Group was then incredibly obvious, and the kind of the rest of is history.
Let me ask you this: you've worked with major brands. You've also, I would assume, have worked with some minor brands. What differences have you observed in how different industries and different brands approach AI adoption and implementation? Are there any industries that you've worked with that are more skeptical, or are there others that are more all in? Is it even possible to make any broad generalizations like that?
Yeah, I think it is. I think CPG tends to be kind of all in because the volume of content is so great in that world. The number of brands, the number of markets and channels. I think beauty tends to be very innovative. So that is also a space where I think you see lots of early adoption and uptake. I think the ones you would expect, finance and healthcare and places where there is more regulation, need to get more things aligned to make a leap. I think that it's not a lack of willingness or visibility of the benefit. I think it's just that there are more boxes to check before you're ready to make those kind of jumps. But we are still making those jumps with those kinds of businesses. It's just, as I say, more process needs to go into that before you start experimenting and trying the tech. So I think that you can make a distinction like that. In terms of big and small, enterprise brands, same thing, they just have to apply more rigor. So for example, when we first acquired Pencil, we built together the kind of enterprise version of Pencil Pro, which was aimed specifically at enterprise level brands. So Pencil had been doing an amazing job for kind of SMBs in providing this end-to-end advertising creation platform. But often in SMBs, you have a very small team or an individual who's responsible for a number of different elements. And when you're working in a team of, a very small team, alignment is relatively easy. The same person signs it off as made it, for example. Whereas when you're working in a large organization following various regulatory codes in many markets, translation and, rigorous legal governance that needs to be in place, for example, you're in a different world. So we very deliberately adapted Pencil Pro to meet all of the requirements that we knew enterprise businesses had. In general, as we went through a process, it started before we even got to quality or what the tech was capable of. It started in legal. What can we make? What is a risk for us? What data do we risk leaking, etc.? So we had to resolve that, and we implemented a process of legal green listing. We reviewed every platform with really kind of deep due diligence, and then we harmonized all of the kind of legal terms so that every model that is available to you inside of Pencil meets criteria, legal criteria. And when we helped brands get there, kind of like what can we do? Or what can we make? The question then became, well, what should we make? And there was a more ethical lens to this, kind of, it's okay for us to develop these kinds of things, but are we comfortable as a brand? Does that align with who we are and our values?
Right.
Help to work through kind of the creation of the ethical addendums and an ethical point of view on how to adopt AI in the right way for that particular brand. And in a large conglomerate business, it might be different for different brands. You have some activist brands in one space, or you have some more functional brands in another, and you might want some differentiation. So that was a nuanced process. And then we started to really get into, are all the right models there? Can we hit all the quality goals? Can we hit all of the diversity goals? And then we started to really sort of do that creative testing. And once we've been able to kind of prove all of those points, take people through that whole journey, then people feel very ready for scale. So they've really gone on a diligent path.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you touched on the legal framework that you developed with Pencil, because I did want to ask you about that. And I feel like you kind of answered about 80% of what I was going to ask anyway. So thank you for the preemptive strike there. Wonderful. What interested me too about that was you started talking about the legal framework. You started talking about some of what you needed to build out there to make sure that Pencil was essentially regulatory compliant and making the companies feel like this was a tool that they could trust that was safe. And then you immediately segued into AI ethics. And I'm interested, was that the natural evolution of that discourse and that build out? Did it go from legal and regulatory type of conversations to more ethical types of conversations? Because AI ethics, I think, if I had to kind of wet my finger and put it in the air here, I'd say that 25 is going to be the year when we start to hear more conversation about AI ethics, because I believe, especially in the United States, we're going to start to have more conversations about the regulatory framework and about some of the legal aspects of it. And I do think that could lead to the ethics piece. But how did that conversation develop, and what were some of the considerations when you were kicking around the ethics questions?
Yeah, it's a great question. And actually for us, it did develop that way. It really did go from like, what can we make to what should we make?
Yeah.
By no means the legal landscape now sorted for AI.
No, no.
Still very open. There are lots of things that could change. However, I think what was possible is that legal departments, procurement departments, they started to kind of align and get their arms around a path that they were prepared to tread that was kind of a risk they could tolerate. And that meant they might restrict certain things, restrict certain models, restrict certain users, restrict certain use cases to work in a space where they were in only kind of safe spaces or low risk spaces. So I think once we'd navigated legal paths in that way, and it was possible we could do certain things, the question came up really quickly. Are we comfortable representing people? Comfortable representing lived experience? Are we comfortable? And there are certain things that brands immediately kind of felt weird about, didn't want to go there, certain things. And we raised the question of things like lived experience a lot with clients. If we're representing, for example, we're doing a campaign and it's focused around Pride, or it's focused around Black History Month, and we're talking about communities that are historically underrepresented that you're advocating for, and talking about lived experience. Do you want to make any part of this using AI, or would we rather work with real people from a real community and make the entire thing in a more traditional way? And maybe you create, adaptations, different formats for different channels using, AI efficiency, but every part of it otherwise is a real person, real experience. So really making very conscious decisions and really making sure people took the time to consider whether they were aligning their AI policy with their in real life inclusion policies. And that if anything, the AI policy was a forcing function to make the in real life policies better, right? Not the other way around. So we spent a lot of time on that, and by no means is it fixed. We just have a really good framework and starting point to work with brands on that now, and we help them get to a really solid place where they can stand behind the decisions about what to do with AI and what not to do with AI. So for us, it was a really natural flow that it came from. We know what we can do, but now it's our choice about what we should do. And that came much more back into marketing versus legal.
Yeah. You just made me realize something, which I don't think I had thought about before, which is that your industry, marketing, branding, the type of work that you're doing is probably one of the more natural entry points for organizations when it comes to AI. which is most likely why we're having this conversation here, because you're so far out in front. Does the responsibility guide that you developed for your client teams and for your engagements, does that translate to other areas of an organization beyond branding and beyond marketing? And are you seeing some of your clients take the work that they've done with you and begin to apply it in different sectors and areas in their organization?
Yeah, it absolutely applies, because it relates to who's mastering the AI, who's
Right.
prompt. Do they have the same, are they reflective of the people we're creating for? So this relates to what's the makeup of the teams that you work with, both on your client side but also on your agency side. Do they have the right kind of experience to bring to this process? So that applies and translates beyond whether you're doing product packaging or product innovation or any other element of your kind of organization. So some of those things are just principles for kind of making sure that you are inclusive in the process. And some of them really relate to being in a kind of audiovisual creation part of the business, which is, who's reflected? What do you see? What's representation like? Are we stereotypical in the way that we do this? Because we're reliant on being trained on historical norms, essentially. So, some of those things related really specifically to making audiovisual content, and some of them were much more kind of fundamental to how do you devise an inclusive approach to bringing technology into the heart of what you do. So I think it was both. And I really hope that some of the brands we work with do take that on in very different parts of the business as well.
Absolutely. Are there any, and I feel like embedded in a couple answers you've given me, you've outlined this, but what are the core principles that you think should guide responsible AI implementation? If you just wanted to recap some of those for us here.
Yeah. We broke it for ourselves. We broke it down into three things. Okay. We wanted to make sure that we had a responsible approach in the tech that we build, in the policy that we write, in the teams that we train, and in the work that we ultimately deliver for the basis of those things. So for us, it was really important that it was multifaceted. It couldn't just be theory. It couldn't just be that we wrote a great policy and then it was up to everybody to kind of do what they needed to with that. So it had to have a strong kind of foundation in policy, but that needed to translate into sort of technical mitigation. We really wanted to make sure, we are in the privileged position to own and build tech that other people leverage. And therefore, although we don't control all of the large language models and foundation models that power everything you do in a generative workflow, it didn't mean we couldn't create layers of mitigation that sat on top of those models. So we built a tool, for example, called Bias Breaker. And what it does, it's a very simple construct. It uses roll of dice probability. So we configured kind of 6 dice for the 6 most common forms of diversity or inclusion. So things like age, ethnicity, gender, disability, etc. And when you put a simple prompt in, so say I want to see an image of a CEO or a person riding a bike, whatever, it will roll those dice. And it will add between 0, 1, and 2 forms of inclusivity to your prompt and give you back a more sophisticated prompt. And you can then use that in any image generation model. And we like that because it takes away tokenism, it introduces the idea of intersectionality, etc. So we really wanted to make sure that we built things that also leveraged the beliefs that we held and that we're encased in our policy. But then we also had to make sure that we made that training mandatory, that we took it through our entire business, that even if you don't make content, you understand the principles of how we go about that, so that wherever you are in the client journey, you speak in the same way about the way that we believe bias should be mitigated. So yeah, we kind of made sure that it was in theory, it was also in practice, and it was also in the infrastructure and the kind of underpinning of how we build things to go to market with.
Fantastic. You've touched on a couple pieces there, and I want to pull on one thread, which is essentially the intersection between humanity and the technology. And you talked about kind of the bias mitigation tool that you built. And at the end of the day, that really, though, comes back on the person that's using that tool to be able to make those effective decisions based on the options that they're presented with. With that in mind, How do you see the relationship evolving between human creatives and AI creatives over the next few years? Because I think it's just a fascinating intersection. You know, if you follow different thought leaders, some talk about cyborgs and centaurs and things like that. But let's get rid of all that jargon. How do you see this relation and this intersection between people and machines continuing to evolve?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And I'd be lying if I said I had the answer. I absolutely.
If you did, I would be very impressed.
Exactly. Yeah, I, I, I think it will be different. My experience so far has been that there's a huge amount of sort of. I don't want to sound like trite, like cliche, but like it's kind of what you put in is what you get back,
Mm-hmm.
and I see that mindset just has an absolutely disproportionate impact on how you utilize AI. So it isn't the most that you have to be the most proficient to get the most out. You have to be the most curious. You have to be the most kind of, I don't know, like able to suspend what your normal processes, what your normal thought patterns are, and go on a journey. And it's really easy to be the person who opens up, any AI tool, writes a semi-decent prompt, gets back a really bland answer and goes, see, doesn't work. It's not very, it's really easy to be that person.
Yep.
It's much more interesting to be the person that goes, that didn't give me quite what I was looking for. Okay, let me try and ask it this way. Let me feed it this. What if it knew that? And really kind of like working through a process that's very iterative in that way. And then sort of landing on something that, even if the final answer didn't come from AI, it sparked the thought that made you go, what about that?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so much more interesting, but it takes a different skill set. It's a different kind of tenacity, sort of different type of curiosity, almost a different application of intelligence.
Yeah.
It's not about being right. It's about the journey you went on and the kind of stimulation back and forth. And I think some people and some roles are really well positioned to know how to do that. Like traditional creative strategic partnerships often have this kind of back and forth, to and fro,
Right.
prompting each other to different thoughts or ideas. And so when you think of it that way, like in that kind of thought partner, people who are used to that kind of thought partnership or very collaborative way of working, I think adapt really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think it will be different as we kind of go further into the journey. But this is maybe the year where we really find out, as we get into like an agentic space and much more of that kind of partnership, but also autonomous use of AI, I think will be a real shift.
For someone that didn't have, or told me that they didn't have the answer, that was a great answer, number one. And number two, I think it speaks, a lot of what you touched on speaks to the fact that this is a general purpose technology. And when we see general purpose technologies come along, they reshape everything. They reshape economies, they reshape laws, they reshape the language that we use, and also, I think, how we think. And this tool, more than a lot of others that we've seen before, is really going to reshape how we think, how we work. I think our society is going to look vastly different in the future from what it does today. And I leave it up to listeners and the world at large to determine what that means and the value judgment they place upon that. To the piece regarding humanity, though, I know that you launched a creative residency program as well as a sustainability program. I think that's going to be live first, second quarter this year. Is that right?
Quarter this year.
Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What is behind and what was the thinking behind the Generative AI creative residency program as well as the AIX sustainability study?
Yeah. My job ultimately is...
Yes, what is your job?
is to try and look a little bit into the horizon of what might be the next challenge that inhibits an enterprise brand from bringing the technology into their business and being able to recognize the benefit of it. And so that's why we started with legal, because the absolute immediate hurdle was legal. And then, as I say, it kind of transitioned into ethics. And very quickly, those... they're not easy to solve, but they were easy to understand how you might go about solving some of that challenge around, as I mentioned, there are tools that can mitigate, there is training, there is developing or partnering on models that have different training sets. There's ways in which we can imagine how we might create less bias in the system. the big unknown that was then on the horizon was really the sustainability of AI and the enormous impact on energy. And we wanted to try and get a really good sense of that. And as we looked across the landscape, we could not find a really comprehensive measure of what it takes to do both train a model and then actually the impact of inference. Actually, as you're using a model, what is the impact there? And we didn't just want to look at carbon footprint. We wanted to look at energy use and water use and sort of critical resource use, etc. So we set out to try and do that. And it's a huge task. So I don't pretend that we've solved it. But we have started with a focus, again, around advertising and marketing and looking at image and ad generation. So we've looked at use cases around the creation of ads and the creation of written content, things like PDPs for your e-com platforms, that kind of thing, and started to take a measure of what the impact is across those 4 areas. So that's something that we'll be releasing later this quarter, is a study of the true impact. And then we felt like it was only one part to give people knowledge about the impact of that. The other part was, how do you mitigate for it? How do you solve for it? And so we started to look at technical ways we might be able to do that. Ways that, for example, you can use latent GPU space, that maybe you don't need everything in 2 seconds. Maybe some things need, you're happy to have them overnight. Maybe there's a way to slow generate. Maybe there are ways to orient towards smaller models for less complex tasks, etc. So we started to look at all the ways in which we could build in, and obviously Pencil as a home for this is fantastic because we already aggregate multiple models, so we can give you access to different models, different sizes, different shapes, at different speeds, etc. And we can make you really aware that like this was a greener choice, and you can sort of default there for things that you don't need so immediately. So we started to look at like ways you might understand the impact, but then also work to mitigate the impact, because fundamentally I do believe this is the year of scale, but scale cannot fly in the face of the other kind of ESG commitments that enterprise brands have made over many years. So they can't both exist unless we find a way for them to coexist. And so I think we have to be able to mitigate as well as understand the impact. So that's where we've kind of started there on sustainability. And with the creative residency program, I come, as you said, my background, part of it is in motor. I've always been in the role of implementing new or alternative models for marketing. I literally started my career at the absolute advent of social and was working at General Motors, putting kind of social media in place, and then moved on to MoFilm, where we were looking at kind of, it was the beginning of the creator economy, and how do we leverage creators when previously 95% of all content was made using traditional creative agencies. Right. And so, it's always been about how do you bring in, open up the path for kind of new voices. And I believe, based on that experience, that the best people, the most creative people, the smartest people, whatever it is, will always work outside of your one business. There's a huge world out there of talent, and you'll never have all of it. And so what we wanted was to have, to build connection to some of the best people we saw experimenting and leaning in to generative AI kind of creative workflows, and just to highlight and showcase the creativity. But we wanted to do it with a real advertising lens, a real focus. If you spend any time on X or on LinkedIn right now, it's absolutely flooded with people showing you what's possible. But doing that within the restriction of advertising content was something a little bit different. When you have a tight brief and it can't be anything, the product needs to be the exact product, and you need fidelity around those things. That needed to be exact. So in that case, we kind of gave our creators that we worked with, and the creators that we brought in to be in residence with the Brandtech Group, we gave them these really strong creative briefs for marketing, and then we worked together on masterclasses around how they made that content. So we really have worked with some of the world's best creators to kind of showcase what's possible. So that was another element. It was kind of like looking at quality and looking at what's possible to achieve, and setting a really inspirational bar for that.
Fantastic. Becky, I am able, within a few minutes of a conversation, to determine if I've got a kindred spirit on the line, and I definitely have one here with you. One of the things my clients are probably tired of hearing me say is that I'm very interested in what's next as opposed to what's now. And let me just ask you this, because you clearly have the experience, you've got the knowledge, and you're very passionate about this. It takes a rare and unique individual to run toward the future. Most people don't even want to look at it. And you are in a full-on sprint. I can tell that from our conversation. Why are you so enthusiastic about the future? What is motivating you personally? What is driving you toward this end?
It's I honestly don't know, and it's been a point of personal reflection or understanding, whereas I've suddenly realized that I sort of ran towards social media at the beginning of that.
Mm-hmm.
As I say, the creator economy, and then actually the kind of the metaverse and Web3, and then ended sort of really leveraging and dealing with AI. And I do think there is a curiosity to a person who really loves to be at the very bottom of a steep learning curve. And I've realized that my favorite place to be is at the very bottom of a very steep learning curve. I think it's just such an exciting place. I love the potential of like almost a blank page of like figuring out how you're going to do something. And I'm really lucky that we acquired a business like Pencil that had so much depth of knowledge and experience building these kind of platforms that I could go on such an amazing kind of learning journey like that. So I think, and I think I'm 100% not alone. There are a lot of people who are looking at this world saying, how exciting. Mm-hmm. The barriers of the past, the things that held us back in the past, so many of them are being moved or broken down,
right.
And ways to do things. And I think that is such an incredible place to be. And what's so unique about this wave of technology is just the speed.
Yeah.
Speed is unreal, and that just keeps it so exciting.
Yep.
And there's always something to learn. No matter how much you take on, you are always at the bottom of that very steep learning curve. And I think that's just a great place to be.
That may be my favorite answer anyone has ever given me, and I'm probably going to steal it at some point because I love that idea of being at the bottom of a steep learning curve. Thank you for that. Becky, I have enjoyed our conversation so much today. As we wrap up, do you have any final pieces of advice or words of wisdom for C-suite executives looking to leverage AI in their organizations? Anything we didn't touch on, or maybe something we did touch on that you'd like to revisit?
I guess one message I want to give is that scale is where you see the benefit. So try not to be afraid of scale. It's not a path you can't come back from. It's not a path that doesn't fork, you don't deviate, but scale is really where you see the biggest benefit of this kind of horizontal, very transformational technology. So I really hope that people continue to embrace it in that way. The most effective, as I was saying, sort of partnerships we're part of is when people have decided they are going to embrace this and is of how, and that's super interesting. And the only other thing is we've really learned and seen that experience levels do not translate like in your teams and your staff and people that work with you. They don't translate in the traditional way. So you are not going to find this kind of experience in people's resume. It's not in their work experience, it's not in their education, it's not in their accreditations or qualifications per se. It's too new for that, and it moves too fast for that. You have to have a whole new approach to talent and to the value you place on mindset and aptitude and ability to kind of pick up something new and dig into it and learn and be self-starting in that way. And I think it's a really different appraisal of like who's in your business and who has real potential for this. And so the other thing that I hope we all kind of collectively really double down on is identifying those pockets of potential and investing in them, because I think that's going to be a huge part of how we build incredible Gen AI workforces.
Pockets of potential. There were at least 3 mic drop statements in your answer there, so thank you. This was wonderful.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
For our listeners that want to get in touch with you or want to learn more about the Brandtech Group, what's the best way for them to reach out to you, either individually or to the organization?
They are very welcome to contact me personally. They can reach me at rebecca@thebrandtechgroup.com.
Perfect. All right. I love it. Thank you so much. This was absolutely wonderful. I really enjoyed our time today.
Thank you.
And for our listeners, thank you for tuning into AI for the C-Suite, where we're committed to helping middle market leaders thrive during the exponential age. If you found value in today's discussion, be sure to subscribe to our podcast. Follow us on all the socials and visit our site, aiforthecsuite.com. Join us next time as we continue to unlock the potential of AI for your organization. Until then, keep your algorithms running, your leadership evolving, and your AI in check. Take care, everybody.